Welcome. We'll get going in just a minute. Well, greetings, everyone. We have a number of people expected today, and as you continue to land, we might as well get going. Welcome to Understanding and Advancing Nature-Based Climate Solutions in Your Community, a 60-minute webinar hosted by Sustainability Network and led by Nature Canada. My name is Paul Babelis, and as Sustainability Network Director, my pleasure to welcome you all here today. We are a 23-year-old environmental capacity builder, and we help environmentalists and environmental NGOs from coast to coast lead, manage, and strategize. So we have around 450, close to 500 participants today. Every province and territory in Canada represented, which is probably a record for us, including Nunavut, PEI, etc. So that's wonderful. 6 US states, mostly in the Northeast, but also Colorado and Arizona, plus District of Columbia, and international reach as well, Mexico, San Salvador, and Belize. So wonderful to see so many people joining us today. We have a number of Nature Canada conservation NGOs on the line, local, regional, provincial, national, some binational groups. But I might mention some of the other non-environmental and less likely bedfellows that are joining us today: Museum Association, Theatre Society, Canadian Feed the Children, and the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action. And also government and quasi-government organizations, both in the US and Canada, the Senate of Canada, the International Joint Commission, Commission for Environmental Cooperation, US Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Denver Parks Department. So a real cross-section, multinational groups, lots of potential for collaboration and impact. I'd invite you all to insert something in the chat, just your name, affiliation, your location, just to sort of start the conversation. And we'll try to use various interactive tools today to make it more of a two-way exchange. You'll be muted during the call, but we do want to get your questions. Please insert sort of longer, far-reaching questions into the Q&A function. If you have a sort of a short-term or immediate need for something, the chat room is a better place to go there. We'll use Zoom polls a couple of times. And also a reminder that you'll get a recording and the slides by end of today. So don't feel stressed if you miss something or some statement, etc. So my final duty is to introduce Graham Saul, who will stick handle things from here on in. Graham is a friend and colleague and executive director of Nature Canada. He has more than 30 years of experience working on social and environmental justice issues in Canada and abroad. And I think it's fair to say that in the last 3.5 years, Graham has recast and reoriented Nature Canada into an innovative and high impact NGO that it is today. He previously served as ED at Ecology Ottawa and Climate Action Network Canada. And he's also worked for Oxfam International in Mozambique and an environmental watchdog group in Washington, DC. So it's with some trepidation that I say this, but over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks to Laura as well from the Sustainability Network, who helped bring this together. We really value and appreciate the good work of the Sustainability Network and its ability to help us engage such a wide audience. And I'm really excited about the idea that we have everyone from every province and territory in Canada here, and it's very appropriate because, of course, nature-based climate solutions, it's really a question of the landscape that you're in. And one of the things we're going to try to focus on a little bit more today is how can we work at a grassroots level in a joint learning process to begin to think about what's most important and appropriate and available and strategic for the landscapes that you're working in. As Paul said, my name is Graham Saul. I'm the Executive Director of Nature Canada. I'm coming to you from Ottawa, the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I'm going to kick us off, and then I'm going to ask Tegan Yaremchuk, our Nature Network organizer on nature-based climate solutions, to say a few words, and then Michael Polanyi, our policy and campaigns manager for nature-based climate solutions, will be coming on. Next slide. So I want to tell you a little bit about Nature Canada in terms of our core mission to discover, defend, and restore nature by way of introduction. Next slide. So by discover, what we mean is we are an organization that works with individuals and groups to help get people into nature. Whether you're a naturalist or a nature lover or a hiker or a community gardener, we're trying to help individuals really enjoy the wonders and science of nature. Next slide. By defend, we mean that there is an urgent need to defend intact ecosystems, to protect intact ecosystems, and the government's commitment to protect 30% of Canada's land and fresh water and oceans by 2030 is in fact probably the most important nature commitment ever made in Canadian history. So we want to help realize that goal. Next slide. And restore is a recognition of the fact that there are areas of the country that are already wildly degraded as a result overwhelmingly of human activity, and in those areas we have to be looking not just to protect or defend those areas, but we have to be looking to actually restore the life that lives within them. Next slide. And we approach these issues in three main ways, what we call the Nature Voice, Nature Nation, and Nature Network. Next slide. By Nature Voice, I mean Nature Canada is a voice for nature in Canada's capital. We have expert staff working on engaging the federal government. Next slide. By Nature Nation, we mean that Nature Canada is a community of nature lovers. We have over 125,000 supporters across the country, another 100,000 or so followers on social media, and we're working to engage these individuals as effectively as possible. Next slide. And then by Nature Network, we mean that there are thousands of organizations across the country that are engaged in some kind of nature activity. And one of the beautiful things about the nature community, and this is actually very relevant to the nature-based climate solutions conversation, is that no matter how small a community you go into, you'll find the birders and the botanists and the naturalists, you'll find the trail associations, the canoe and kayak clubs, you'll find the wildlife centers and the land trusts. There's this fabulous ecosystem of nature groups across the country. Nature Canada is working to engage and support and mobilize as many of those organizations as possible. Next slide. We work across a number of program areas focused on expanding protected areas, the emerging 2 billion tree initiative, nature-based climate solutions. Naturehood is about getting kids and families into nature and increasingly youth, bird-friendly cities, and we also host the Green Budget Coalition. And all of our work is increasingly done within the context of recognizing the importance of reconciliation and Indigenous-led conservation, as well as the need to better engage racialized communities. And we have another panel coming up on March 18th that includes a number of people that are on our advisory group in terms of engaging racialized communities as a really systemic failure of the nature community in the past decades that we need to address. Next slide. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, or we are going to talk a little bit about what nature-based climate solutions are, why they are important, a little bit about Nature Canada's support to local groups around nature-based climate solutions, and some of the promising approaches for nature-based climate solutions. And then we hope we'll have a bit of a discussion, time for Q&A, maybe even a bit of a chat based on some of the stuff you're putting in the chat slide and in the chat stream. Next slide. So what are nature-based climate solutions? I mean, and I think part of our journey over the next, our collective journey over the next decade is really to arrive at a common definition that people come to understand. One way of describing it is that nature-based climate solutions are actions that work with and enhance nature to help address climate change. They include things like conservation, protection, restoration, improved land management, and adaptation. And they have an element of it that is either specifically geared towards climate change adaptation or geared towards the role of nature in storing carbon or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So we would argue that there is actually an urgent need for action on climate change, that we are facing right now a twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss or species loss. We would argue there's huge potential associated with nature-based climate solutions to contribute to greenhouse gas mitigation, human resilience and adaptation to climate change, and that nature-based climate solutions provide opportunities for reconciliation and Indigenous-led conservation that are extremely important, and that Canada is in fact very well poised to act. Next slide. As far as Nature Canada is concerned, the opportunity here really is that if local nature groups, and if nature groups are actors in general, but we are trying to gear this conversation towards more grassroots and regional and local and municipal actors, if local nature groups push for the adoption of nature-based climate solutions, then we have the opportunity to not only accelerate action on climate change in Canada, we also have the opportunity to accelerate action to address species collapse and nature protection in general. So it's a win-win scenario. Next slide. And I think it's fair to say that nature groups really need the 2020s, this decade, to be a breakthrough decade in addressing climate change if we want to reverse wildlife decline. We know that climate change right now is not the core driving factor behind species collapse and extinction in the world, but if we do not address climate change, we are not going to be able to deal with reversing wildlife decline. And furthermore, the climate change movement needs nature lovers, because if the climate change movement is going to have the scale of the breakthrough that it needs in 2020, in the 2020s, then it needs all of the constituencies on board. And nature lovers represent a vast swath of the people in this country and around the world who care about it. And public demand for action on climate change is generating unprecedented opportunities and resources for nature-based climate solutions. So as a nature organization, we look at nature-based climate solutions as not only an opportunity to address two problems at once, but also an opportunity to harness the demand for action on climate change in a way that will also address issues that we've been working on for decades, such as species collapse, conservation, etc. Next slide. At Nature Canada, we're taking sort of a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And at a top-down level, we have a variety of folks like Michael who are working with other national nature organizations to try to shape the way in which the national policy dialogue is playing out. Basically engage in federal government relations work. And then at the bottom up, what we're doing is we're trying to work with others to learn how to do this in practice on the ground. And I do want to acknowledge that we're not coming to you today with the message, this is how you do it. And I wish that we were that far along. We're coming to you today with a message that says, this is a learning process for all of us. And we have an opportunity to engage in a learning process and an experimentation in a way that will allow 1,000 flowers to bloom and move forward this issue in a way that is exciting. We want to encourage creativity, and we want to go on a journey with you about how these things best work in your specific landscapes and communities. Next slide. I won't belabor the point, but the reality is that for the first time in Canadian history, nature-based climate solutions are a core component of Canada's climate change plan. This image actually comes from a recent federal government document, and you can see how the root system that involves some of the very specific programs that are rolling out in Canada in terms of supporting Indigenous protected areas, expanding protected areas, the restoration work that's going on, and the 2 billion tree work. They've quite clearly articulated nature-based climate solutions, they being the federal government, as one of many arrows in the quiver or options or tools in the toolbox. And so it's an exciting time because they're also putting billions of dollars behind this work. Next slide. So we're kind of struggling with the question of what are the challenges to implementing nature-based climate solutions at the local level? How do we as an organization best work with local groups to try to encourage and support as much action as possible, as quickly as possible around nature-based climate solutions? And we are asking ourselves questions about how are we understanding which nature-based climate solutions are appropriate for given landscapes or situations? How do you know what resources are available and how do you access them most easily? Who should you be engaging when you're interested in advancing in nature-based climate solutions to receive support and technical assistance, and how is the best way to engage them? And how are we making the case on the ground for why these solutions should be implemented over other solutions? So these are all some of the challenges that Nature Canada is looking to help other groups address as we ourselves advance the process of trying to address them. Next slide. So we are in the process of doing some exciting public opinion research to better understand how Canadians see nature-based climate solutions and what's the best way to talk to them about it, and what is the most effective way to define it in the most productive way and move people from sort of latent support to active support. We'll talk a little bit today about a toolkit that we're bringing together that is supposed to be something that can help people think through the various different directions they can go and access different kinds of information. We'll tell you a little bit about a national nature-based climate solutions project map that we're working on to help you easily identify different ideas. And we're really interested in running workshops and just having conversations with you about how these issues can best be operationalized in your region. And that's the core message from today. If you're interested in the ideas we're putting forward, we're interested in having a more detailed conversation about how they can best be applied in the region that you're working and how we can best help you think through how to operationalize this. Next slide. So there's going to be a poll that's going to come out. I haven't seen the poll yet, but there it is. So just to kick us off, what nature-based climate solutions are you most interested in? And you can choose all that apply. Get a better sense for who the 250 odd folks on this webinar are and where they're coming from. And then after that, I'm going to turn it over to Tegan Yaremchuk. And as I said, Tegan is our Nature Network organizer for nature-based climate solutions. And the Nature Network team is the largest team in Nature Canada, and they're the team that's focused on working with those hundreds of nature groups across the country. So Tegan will probably be doing some of the lead in terms of following up on different opportunities to carry on this conversation afterwards if you're interested. Tegan, over to you. Here's the results. Okay, so basically there's a good distribution of interest across all of, well, this isn't all of the kinds of nature-based climate solutions work, but it's an interesting example of the fact that people are interested across a range of areas. Restoring natural systems is noticeably the largest, though. Tegan?
All right. Hello, everybody. Like Graham said, I am Tegan Yaremchuk. So throughout this presentation, we will be putting a link to a form in the chat. I believe my colleague Erin has already done so. And this is something that you can fill out to let us know how to contact you. And we'll be getting in touch with every single person who fills this out so that we can discuss how to best support you or work with you towards nature-based climate solutions in your jurisdiction. And just a note, there are kind of multiple areas that you can indicate interest in, and I'll go into detail about some of these very shortly, so that you can better understand what that means. And Erin and my colleague Nick as well, I believe we'll be putting that link into the chat periodically so that it doesn't get lost. So, as Graham mentioned, we are in the process of creating a toolkit that will bring together relevant, available information, categorize it so that it's easy to find, and provide an explanation of how you can use each piece. Our goal is to support local action to get nature-based climate solutions incorporated into municipal or county climate plans and provide good examples of nature-based climate solutions projects. The key audience for this toolkit is nature groups and other community groups, but the toolkit will be useful for municipalities and other stakeholders as well. So the two main categories that the toolkit will be organized by are landscape and project type. I'll go over these in a moment to give you a better idea of what will be included, but this is just to allow users to kind of sort through everything that will be included in it. And for each page in the toolkit, we'll be answering the following questions. Why is this section important, and why should it be included in your nature-based climate solutions strategy? What are some examples of nature-based climate solutions being implemented well? Or what is a good example of a project? Are there any kind of guides that can help you in your nature-based climate solutions adventure? And who else should you be talking to? Who are the experts that can help you or provide more detailed insight into your particular scenario or project? And I just want to note that we're currently looking for some organizations to help us review the toolkit before it is publicly available. So if you're interested in this, please ensure that you indicate so in the form so that we can easily follow up with you. And I would like to take a moment to ask you to share in the chat if you have any nature-based climate solutions projects or initiatives that you're involved in that might be replicated in other places. Yeah, if you could just share some in the chat while I'm presenting, and then that will allow other people to see what everyone's up to, and we can all draw some inspiration from that. So the first way that the toolkit will be, or one of the ways that the toolkit will be organized is through different landscapes. So nature-based climate solutions can look quite different given the landscape and are quite specific to the landscape in which you're in. Canada is a very large country, and as thorough as we would like to be, it would be impossible to create a toolkit that covers every single area. So we've chosen 5 landscapes to start with in order to make it easier to find resources based on geographic location and your surroundings. So the first of that is forests. So Canada has about 30% of the world's boreal forest and 9% of global forests, making the health of Canadian forest landscapes critical to the health of the planet as a whole. They're valuable from a global climate change perspective because they remove carbon from the atmosphere as they grow, and they continue to store large amounts of carbon, not to mention the hundreds of species that call our forests home, including many of those iconic Canadian species. The next category is grasslands. So Canada has actually lost over 80% of native prairie ecosystem stretching across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. These grasslands are a key component to fighting climate change because they store carbon within their root systems and soil. Protecting and restoring these landscapes keeps these greenhouse gases in the ground while also providing habitat for grassland species, including many that are on the endangered list. The next category is agriculture. So farmers and ranchers are actually the largest landowner group in Canada, which means there is a great opportunity for implementing nature-based climate solutions in these areas, and they cannot be overlooked. Agricultural landscapes also must be considered because activities like breaking the ground for agriculture purposes can actually release greenhouse gases that were once stored in the soil and roots. And it also destroys native habitat for many species. And then we have coastal and oceans. So Canada actually has the longest coastline in the world, which creates both opportunities and risks when it comes to climate change. Coastal wetlands have the potential to capture more carbon dioxide than any other natural system. And they also have potential to protect inland areas from sea level rise due to climate change. These ecosystems are losing biodiversity at an unprecedented rate due to human activity. So taking action to protect or restore these areas will have significant benefit for climate and for these species that call it home. The final landscape category is wetlands and peatlands. So wetlands play an important role in protecting our health and well-being by reducing water pollution, preventing flooding, and storing carbon, as well as other amazing benefits. They also protect wildlife, and hundreds of species call these areas home. Peatlands, which are wetlands with a certain amount of moss or plant matter known called peat, store more carbon than any other type of ecosystem. 1/3 of global wetlands are actually in Canada, and in settled areas of Canada, up to 70% of our wetlands and peatlands have been destroyed or degraded. So you can see that these are all pretty important to factor into nature-based climate solutions. So now I thought I would walk you through kind of what one of our pages in these toolkit look like so that you can see our approach and how we're organizing it. I just wanted to say this is not a formatted example and there would be more resources included, but this is just kind of to give you an idea of what we're thinking about and everything that will show up once the toolkit is public. So the first section of the page, it is a description of the landscape. So in this case, in this example, coastal and ocean regions. And it goes into some detail about why they're important through a climate change and biodiversity lens, and then details about why they should be considered when thinking about nature-based climate solutions initiatives, whether that be inclusion in a local climate plan or another type of project. So that kind of answers the first question that I mentioned previously. And then the next portion gives an example of the types of resources that will be included in our toolkit. So we will include examples of municipal climate plans that incorporate nature-based climate solutions for that particular landscape. And for each climate plan that we include, we will ensure to put details on why we chose to include that particular climate plan, including why it's a good example and if there's anything unique about it. We'll also reference specific page numbers so that users of the toolkit can really easily find what we're looking for. We didn't just want to list a bunch of climate plans and not give kind of any more insight than that, because the insight really is what's important here. And then there will also be case studies and other resources that will help organizations develop their own nature-based climate solutions project or initiatives in their area. This will be a great way to kind of find out some best practices, lessons learned from other groups who have already done it. And we aim to have multiple examples and resources in each of these sections, but this page is just kind of showing you a couple so that you get the idea of what is included. And then finally, we will be including a list of experts who are working specifically or have knowledge of a particular sector. While we want to support organizations as much as we can, we also recognize that we at Nature Canada are not experts on every single particular issue or project. So we have compiled lists of people that you can be talking to. So this could include other nonprofits, organizations, consultants who have experience incorporating, in this case, coastal and oceans into climate plans, or organizations that can help calculate the impacts of a given project. So while you're thinking about which landscapes best represent your jurisdiction, you also need to be asking yourself, whose traditional territory are you operating on, and how are you engaging with Indigenous communities? We acknowledge and recognize that the concept of nature-based climate solutions is very closely tied with how Indigenous people have been managing their territories for millennia. And Nature Canada is committed to supporting and advancing nature-based climate solutions. And we believe this must be done in partnership, consultation with Indigenous communities, right from the municipal level all the way up to the federal level. Okay, so going back to the toolkit and the organization of it. So we will also be categorizing it by the type of project or intervention. This will allow users just one more way to access and find the resources that they need and are most helpful to them. So these project types include protected areas. So as Graham mentioned, the Government of Canada has made unprecedented commitment to protecting 30% of land and ocean by 2030. These commitments are extremely important for nature, as I'm sure you all know. But we also can't forget climate change when we're determining which areas to protect. This is for two main reasons. Many of our landscapes in Canada store enormous amounts of carbon, which I kind of just touched on. And protecting these spaces in perpetuity will ensure that these landscapes are not destroyed and the carbon that is stored within them is not released into the atmosphere. The other consideration is that some ecosystems will change over time due to climate change. We've already seen some change in migration patterns of some species because of this. This means that we need to preemptively protect areas that may be increasingly important as the climate changes. And just to note that there are many ways to advance the protection as a nature-based climate solutions at the municipal level. It doesn't just have to be that huge scale that we're talking about when we talk about 30% of all of Canada being protected. Restoration is the practice of renewing and restoring degraded, damaged, or destroyed ecosystems and habitats by active human intervention and action. These actions can have both positive climate impacts and biodiversity impacts. An example of this would be to restore a wetland to its national state, which would provide habitat, but would have climate mitigation properties such as water filtration abilities, flood mitigation, and carbon sequestration. So it's taking in and storing carbon from the atmosphere. Natural and green infrastructure. So natural infrastructure is an area or system that is either entirely naturally occurring or naturalized and then intentionally managed to provide multiple benefits for the enjoyment, for the environment and human well-being. Natural infrastructure can also be an alternative to gray infrastructure, which is man-made infrastructure in some cases. And green infrastructure is the natural vegetative system and green technologies that provide many benefits. An example of green infrastructure would be green roofs. And finally, adaptation. So adaptation refers to adjustments in ecological, social, or economic systems in response to climate change effects or impacts. Climate change does not solely affect the human population. So adaptation measures should also be implemented to protect many species that we share this earth with against the effects of climate change. An example of an adaptation measure would be to preemptively restore coastal salt marshes in order to deal with sea level rise. So to go along with the toolkit, we are also partnering with the original creators of this map. It is a project map, the original creators being Nature New Brunswick and the New Brunswick Environmental Network. And we are looking to add many more projects from across the country. So this map will showcase a diverse selection of different nature-based climate solutions projects. And our hope is that it will serve as an inspiration for other groups to get involved with nature-based climate solutions and to serve as a form of connection to projects happening on the ground. So if you have a project that you think should be showcased on this map, please be sure to indicate that in the form that is in the chat, and we will get in touch to gather more details from you. So as I have mentioned, we are here to support you. We want to support on the ground nature-based climate solutions. Nature-based climate solutions are big, and the term is also very broad. So we're looking to help local groups understand what nature-based climate solutions are and how they can be implemented in your specific jurisdiction. We're doing this through a multiple of offerings and different ways, some of which I've already spoken about. So the toolkit, as discussed, please make sure to sign up to our e-newsletter on the form at the very bottom to be informed when it is publicly available. And like I said, we're also looking for a couple of individuals who have experience with municipal nature-based climate solutions to review the toolkit with us. And then the map, so we want to showcase your amazing projects and inspire people across the country to take nature-based climate solutions actions. Workshops, as Graham mentioned, if you are interested in pursuing any projects at the community level or engaging with your municipality on nature-based climate solutions, please get in touch or check that box on the form, and we will work with you to develop workshops that will help you along the way. We will also be bringing together a group of organizations who are working on nature-based climate solutions in a community of practice. We will be able to learn from each other, discuss specific topics, common issues, and problem solve together. And then after the public opinion research that Graham mentioned, we will be developing some communications assets and training materials based on what we have learned. Partners and organizations that we are working with will have access to some of these materials. So I just want to end my portion by saying that this is a super exciting moment and we are also learning. So we want to learn with you. We're looking to find and support organizations who are excited about nature-based climate solutions who are doing work on the ground and figure out how we can best support you. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Michael, who, just a reminder, is our policy and campaign manager at Nature Canada on the Nature-Based Climate Solutions program.
Yes, hi everyone. Great to see so many people and the amazing work that people are doing around nature-based solutions. I'm going to be quite brief because I see that there are quite a number of questions, really good questions about the toolkit, about nature-based solutions. So we want time to get to that. But I wanted to speak just briefly about what we see as some of the opportunities for advancing nature-based solutions at the municipal level, at the local level, because we really want this toolkit to be applicable to what are really the opportunities that we see and examples of innovative approaches and resources to help people have an impact at the municipal level. So next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly throw out 7 opportunities that I've seen emerging and that are promising. And one is just recognizing how many municipalities have developed climate plans, have issued climate emergency declarations in the past couple of years. And I think this is a real opportunity to ensure that the protection, restoration, of nature is embedded in those climate plans. And I think we're seeing examples of that taking place. I put the example of Montreal up here, examples of tree planting, expanding green spaces, valuing natural assets, and protecting areas and cities as part of climate plans. And for each of these areas, I'm putting up a resource or two that I found to be particularly helpful. In this case, there's a great resource from the David Suzuki Foundation about how to assess the strength of your municipality's climate plan, and also a good resource from ICLEI in terms of developing biodiversity protection plans. Next slide, please. I think a second trend that we're seeing at the municipal level is the increased embracing of climate lens or a climate impact assessment, the implementation of these tools to ensure that municipal spending and policy aligns with emission reduction. And we're also, I think, in some of those climate lenses, seeing the incorporation of a lens around biodiversity or protection of natural areas. And so I think, again, this is an opportunity. There's a good resource from Clean Air Partnership that goes over, reviews some of the climate lenses. And I should say here that many municipalities, or some municipalities, are also developing equity lenses to strengthen policymaking at the municipal level to ensure that it reduces the dramatic inequities economically and socially that we're seeing. And I just want to say that I think it's really important that we align our work for the protection of nature, for climate action, with action to reduce inequities faced by Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. Next slide, please. So a third area of opportunity, I think many of you are probably aware of the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative. Really good work working with a range of municipalities to assess the value that is provided to municipalities by natural assets like forests, shorelines, wetlands, so that in their planning and in their policymaking, municipalities recognize that actually investing in the protection of these valuable natural assets is less costly than building up human-made infrastructure, gray infrastructure that would provide the services that are provided. So I think it's a really important tool, and I encourage you to check out that resource. Next slide, please. So many municipalities are growing, buildings are being put up, land is being expanded into, and so it's critical that the policies that municipal policies and bylaws are used to ensure that these new developments not only don't do harm to natural heritage systems to watersheds, forests, grasslands, etc., but that they enhance the protection and of these spaces, natural spaces. And so I just put up the example of the Toronto Green Roof bylaw as one example in the area of green infrastructure. But really, there are some good resources out there in terms of policies and ways of, and best practices in terms of land use planning. Again, I think the ones listed are very useful. Next one, please. I think that there are a number of funding mechanisms that are available to municipalities. I noticed that in the chat, somebody did post the resource, that the first resource listed on this slide, the Local Conservation Funds in British Columbia guide, which is an excellent guide for groups who want to set up conservation funds at the community level. And I think there are a range of tools that municipalities have in terms of special property tax levies, development levies, issuing green bonds. Some of the larger cities are doing that. And I think also mentioned in the chat was the Alternative Land Use Service Program, ALICE, which has huge potential to funnel carbon offset investments into ecological services provided by farmers and others. So I think this is another important area to consider. Next, please. Wanted to also mention a couple of cross-jurisdictional initiatives. I think when cities and towns come together, they are more powerful, they have a stronger voice, and they can push for strong actions at the municipal level around protection and restoration. Encourage people to take a look at the Green City Accord that's been developed in Europe, and also one that Nature Canada is involved in terms of encouraging municipalities to certify themselves as bird friendly, and to, in doing so, encourage policies that protect trees and species and landscapes. And next slide. And lastly, I think from the chat, we've just seen how engaged many of you are in community-based initiatives. And I think we're very interested in including examples of these community-led initiatives. And Tegan mentioned the map, and there's so many, I think, good examples of education programs, monitoring and citizen science programs, land protection and restoration projects. And I think we can learn from each other in advancing these community initiatives. Next slide, please. So I won't speak too much to this. Many of you are already involved in nature-based climate solutions, and it's great to see for those who are thinking about how to get started. Here are some 3 first steps that I think can help to gather the information and make the connections that you need to do to advance solutions. And again, another resource from David Suzuki Foundation, the Future Ground Network, has really good tools, just concrete tools about how to connect with others and how to communicate with your city councilors effectively, your town councilors, your municipal councilors as well. I think that's what I was going to say. I think we had one more quick poll that we wanted to put up just to get a sense from you. What supports are most needed from your perspective for you to advance climate solutions in your jurisdictions? So maybe we'll give a few seconds for that. And I think I was going to turn it over to Paul. Oh yes, there's a slide here. Again, just a reminder what Tegan said. Please do fill out the form so we can keep in touch with you and learn from you, but also hopefully provide you with some support in your local actions.
And one of the things I think that's worth considering or keeping in mind is that the research is moving quickly on these issues, and there's a fair amount of exciting work that's currently being done. Nature United has been doing some good work looking at the Canadian context. And part of the challenge here is just to stay in touch with each other as these issues proceed, and to create the conditions for sharing information and supporting one another as we proceed.
Okay, great. Thanks very much to all. I guess we'll close down the poll. Stop sharing, and we've got about 10 minutes or so. I've got about a number of questions came in, and unfortunately we won't be able to get to them all. But just so you know, Nature Canada will get a transcript of all the questions and the chat box as well. So there could be follow up beyond that. But I'm hoping to pose about 5 questions. So on average, maybe 2-minute responses or so, and we'll try to get to them all before we close at the top of the hour. First question relates to decolonization and sort of indigenous relations. So how does the Nature Canada nature-based climate solution strategy relate to decolonization, land back movement, and indigenous ecological stewardship?
I mean, at a fundamental level, Indigenous-led conservation is perhaps the most exciting thing going on in the nature community and conservation movement in Canada right now. I think we are trying to support the creation of Indigenous protected and conserved areas wherever possible. We are having conversations with groups within the context of the 2 Billion Tree Initiative that are Indigenous-led planting initiatives. We're reaching out to individual First Nations and Indigenous communities to have a conversation about what their reforestation and afforestation goals are. And we'll be trying to profile some of the leadership that will be emerging in this area.
Great, thank you. And there was a tip inserted about the Rotary Club. So I understand Cross Country have a new environmental sustainability sort of priority among their work. So both to the local organizations on the call today and for Nature Canada is sort of a suggested contact of reaching out.
It's good to know.
A question related to the pandemic. So the questioner noted that oftentimes sort of recovery strategies are around building, construction, traditional infrastructure. So I guess the question is, are there responses within the nature-based climate solution strategy that can take the recovery to consider non-traditional and green infrastructure? Is there a link?
Absolutely. I mean, within the context of Building Back Better, we can look at programs like large-scale tree planting and urban tree planting. We can look at investments in natural assets and infrastructure so that nature is providing many of the services that would otherwise be provided, such as water management that would otherwise be provided through gray infrastructure. There's no shortage of ways that this is relevant to municipal and county levels. And one of the things that was said earlier that I really want to reinforce is that when we think about where the opportunity is here, like we're trying to engage the federal government about how they can make sure that their initiatives are as effective as possible in addressing both species collapse and climate change at the same time. But the real opportunity in terms of nature-based climate solutions is that every jurisdiction across Canada that has a climate change plan should have a nature-based climate change component of that plan. Right? So, I saw that funding was one of the most important needs that groups had, and I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, like, we've gotten to the point where most responsible jurisdictions understand that they need a strategy for fighting climate change. And what we're saying is nature-based climate solutions need to be part of that strategy. And so the simplest thing that anyone can do about how their city is developing in every jurisdiction is just ask the question, do I have a climate change? Does my jurisdiction, municipality or county, have a climate change plan? And does it have a nature-based climate solutions dimension? And if it doesn't, start the conversation about how to get it there.
Okay. Yeah, so that leads kind of into a somewhat related question. specifically around sort of rural strategies, in particular, rural and municipal. So, I mean, the couple questions that I've combined into that were more around, is the Nature Canada assumption that you'd be equipping local organizations to then in turn work with their municipal councils? Or is there sort of direct engagement planned? And also the whole rural kind of question, which is maybe somewhat different from urban municipalities. So a couple of big issues in there, but.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a set of questions about how nature-based climate solutions can be operationalized that is relevant to every landscape, whether it's urban or rural, or whether it's West Coast or East Coast or prairie or northern. And the question just becomes, for each individual jurisdiction and their respective landscapes, how do we apply these? We've also found in recent polling that was done for Eco-Analytics by Environics that there is in fact more support for nature-based climate solutions in rural areas than there is for the clean energy transition. Right? Nature Canada is trying to be very clear that nature-based climate solutions are not a substitute for the clean energy transition. We basically need to phase out fossil fuels as a society, as a planet. And that's clear and the most important thing we can do. But nature-based climate solutions are increasingly clear that it's very valuable. And there are constituencies and people who are more comfortable talking about nature-based climate solutions than they are the clean energy transition, and are more interested in nature than they are solar panels or tar sands. And so there's a real opportunity in rural areas to have a conversation that you might not be able to otherwise have about climate change and about how the land that people live on can be part of the solution.
Okay.
I know, Tegan, did you, or Michael, did you have anything to add to any of those pieces?
Okay, well, another question related to children and families. So I guess a curiosity about where those two kind of groups fall within sort of priority audiences to engage. Are there plans for a virtual network, workshops? What's the engagement strategy for youth, children, and families?
That's a great question. I mean, Nature Canada has a program called Naturehood, which is about working with children and youth and parents to access nearby nature. And we work with partners across the country, local groups that run programs that get kids into national wildlife areas and migratory bird sanctuaries and nearby nature. And we're currently trying to grow that program, and we're growing it explicitly within the context of better engaging racialized communities. Taking on new partners like Green UMA and other partners that work with constituencies that, and the nearby nature is often more urban than rural. We work with kids because creating those foundational values and love of nature at an early age is probably the single most important determinant of whether or not you're going to be a champion for nature later in your life. And it's absolutely imperative that we work to get as many kids into nature as possible and to break down the barriers that systemic racism have created that provide privileged access to nature for some groups over others. And so I guess how this relates to nature-based climate solutions is just to the degree that we can mobilize constituencies to get nature integrated into the suite of climate change actions, and children and parents can be part of that, that's only going to make us stronger. There's an organization out there called For Our Parents that does work with parents around the importance of climate change, and any group that is working with children is not only doing a long-term service to all of us, but hopefully will also be talking to those children about and youth about nature-based climate solutions, because this is an opportunity for us to talk about the twin crises of species collapse and climate change at the same time. I might have misspoken. It's for our kids, and Matt Price will be very mad at me if he hears I've misspoken.
Michael or Tegan, any thoughts on that? No. Okay. Fine. Well, yeah. Question around carbon sequestration and credits. So, how do both those? How does sequestration play into nature-based climate solutions? Emerging methodologies, standardized approaches, any particularly promising approaches? And is the carbon credit aspect a possible funding mechanism?
Yeah, so there's a lot there, right? There's an active debate going on around the modeling and the methodologies associated with how much greenhouse gas emissions are stored or emitted as a result of protection or restoration or the destruction and degradation of nature. It's probably more developed in the forestry sector than anywhere else because of its relationship to the UN climate negotiations and to the carbon credit opportunities. But it's evolving quickly across the board. And I am not a specialist in the various different methodologies, though I think that's something we'd have to include in the toolkit. I think we're also going to see hopefully some of the research that is being done in Canada, including the Nature United research that I spoke of earlier, is going to break it down a little bit more for us in the future in terms of exactly what kinds of opportunities are out there and different kinds of subcomponents of ecosystems and different kinds of interventions. We believe that there is a role for carbon credits, but we do think we need to be very careful about them. We want it to be true additionality. We don't want there to be funding for projects that were going to happen anyways, and then companies buy those credits and use them as a way to avoid having to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel use. And so we do understand that there's a potential for carbon credits to play an important role in protecting nature. We hope they'll especially be made available to Indigenous-led conservation efforts. But we're also very conscious that we do need to move as quickly as possible to phase out oil, coal, and gas. And we want there to be real additionality in carbon credits rather than credits used as a way of avoiding doing the often difficult work of making the clean energy transition.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, what would likely be the final question relates to a term called proforestation. So the question is how proforestation, which is growing intact existing forests towards their full ecological potential versus traditional tree planting. So it's how does that play into nature-based climate solutions?
So I guess I'd say two things. First of all, since this is the last question, I want to remind everyone that we are interested in continuing this conversation with you. We were very conscious of the fact that 1 hour was not going to be enough time. And if you fill in that form, and if we get the form back in there, we will create the opportunity to come back and talk to you and work with you around any questions that you have. Secondly, in relation to proforestation, I mean, we need all hands on deck. Right. And so if we can help reduce species collapse or reverse wildlife decline through restoration efforts while simultaneously making a contribution to the fight against climate change, or helping build a more resilient community in terms of the impacts of severe weather, or helping a species survive climate change, then we should be doing that. If we can avoid carbon emissions by stopping the destruction of an intact forest, then we should be doing that. And if we can be thinking about investing in ways to better manage forests so that there are greater carbon sinks, then we should be doing that as well. And that applies to every one of the different landscapes and every one of the different approaches. And it applies to the basic premise that nature-based climate solutions should never be used as an opportunity to provide complacency in relation to the clean energy revolution. Just as we need to try to make progress in every dimension of the wetlands, peatlands, forests, coastal areas on nature-based climate solutions, we need to prioritize and continue to make progress on every dimension of the clean energy revolution, because at the end of the day, there's no amount of nature-based climate solutions that will ever be able to compensate for the amount of fossil fuels that we are currently putting into the amount of greenhouse gases associated with our use of oil, coal, and gas.
Okay, great. So as Graham mentioned, the conversation continues, but this conversation is coming to a close. I'll leave it to Graham to close us out after saying a few things. And one is, we do want your feedback from this specific session. So Laura will insert a link into the chat box where you can pull up the feedback form, and you'll get that same link in a couple hours when we send you the slides and a recording of today's session. And then I'll finally mention that I encourage you to check out other things we have coming up at Sustainability Network. Sustainabilitynetwork.ca is where we list all of our upcoming events. So check us out, and we hope to see you all again soon. So over to Graham to close us out.
I just want to once again thank the Sustainability Network for hosting this webinar. Obviously, thank Tegan and Michael for their work to bring it together. I think what's really important to understand is that there's a lot of really interesting work being done in Ottawa around policy considerations. But at the end of the day, what's going to drive a true societal transformation around this issue is going to be the work that groups like many of the people on this webinar are going to do at a very local level, whether you're a municipality, a conservation authority, a local nature group, a little community club, whatever. The real work of changing Canada as it pertains to nature-based climate solutions begins on the ground. And if we want these broader policy frameworks to succeed, we need grassroots demand for action. And we're looking forward to being on that journey with you.
Great, everyone. Well, thanks to everyone for coming. Stay safe, and we hope to see you all again soon.